Thank you very much. All right. So with that, I want to thank our sponsors. So our executive speaker series focuses on a different industry sector every event. We get to learn about our regional economy and all the great companies and sectors that make it up. And our event series is sponsored by Advanced Professionals Insurance and Benefit Solutions. And our event sponsor today, Bristol Myers Squibb. So I have Nathan Edmondson from Advanced Professionals here just to give a couple of remarks. So Nathan.
Well, thanks very much and welcome everybody. I'm Nathan Edmondson. I'm the sales manager for AP, Advanced Professionals, AP for short. And what we do is we're a general agency and wholesale benefit consultancy that focuses on bringing comprehensive and affordable healthcare and employee benefit solutions to small businesses in Washington. We do that in a few different ways, but primarily we do that by partnering with organizations that would like to bring those types of services to their membership, such as the Seattle Chamber. Specific to the life sciences industry, we've been very involved in that industry over the 20 years of my involvement in the practice, even way back when, to a little organization called the WBBA, the Washington Biotechnology and Biomedical Association, which is today Life Science Washington. And so we've had kind of a front row seat in seeing this industry grow and go through a lot of challenges over the years and really helped a lot of these companies, grow their bottom line, recruit and retain talent, which as most of you know, is very hard to come by within this industry and just generally right now in the state of Washington, the Seattle area. So, really excited to hear about some of the new things happening from the panel. And at the end of the day, if there's anyone in the audience today that has a need for resources within the employee benefit arena, we're a resource for you. So, please let us know if we can be of service to you or to your employees, or if you just have questions about kind of the state of healthcare. I know it's not the sexiest subject out there, but it is an important one and one that is a pretty significant bottom line for businesses that do offer health insurance to their employees. So please do consider this a resource. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Lee, and just thanks again for letting us be a part of this. The executive speaker series is a fantastic one, and very excited to hear from the panel today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. And if you want to drop your contact information into the chat, if folks do have any questions for you, feel free to do that. So with that, let's get to the main event. I will introduce our moderator. He will get the panel going, and we have until 12:15 really to just hear this great conversation, and you have time to ask questions. So our moderator today is Mark Cummings. He is the president and CEO of Life Science Washington. So he leads Washington's statewide trade association representing the state's life science industry. So that includes biotech, medical device companies, nonprofit research institutes, innovative startup companies, and a range of highly specialized service providers in the industry. Life Science Washington has over 500 members, just growing and solidifying Washington State's reputation as one of the top life science clusters in the nation. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Mark. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be here today, and we have an incredible panel of folks that are really working on the cutting edge of the industry here. For some of you, I was just reflecting back. I think I did this panel maybe 4 or 5 years ago with Hans Bishop, and we were talking about some of the challenges that they was referencing, and man, it could not be more different today. In the past 4 years, Washington's life science industry has grown 23.5%. That's faster than private sector job growth in the state and faster than life science job growth nationally. And really in that time, I mean, the region has gone from a top research cluster to one of the best top emerging clusters. So now we are one of the top 10 biotech and life science clusters in the country. So COVID did not slow the industry down. In some ways, it actually accelerated it. And that's it's largely because this region, we have been at kind of the cutting edge of a number of trends that have all kind of come together, and you'll hear that from the panel. Areas like cancer and cell and gene therapy, kind of the convergence of biotech and digital in drug development, which obviously we've got incredible expertise in the region here. And then, but most interestingly, I think what people might not be aware of is that the manufacturing sector of life sciences has grown considerably in the last couple of years. And again, that's because we're not a low cost provider like somewhere in North Carolina. We're at the cutting edge of stuff, and so people want that advanced manufacturing to be right next to their research. And I will just close with the fact that I think a little tidbit that I just found out that in terms of STEM industries, the life science industry has the highest concentration of women of any STEM industry in the state, almost on par with women in the general workforce. So opportunities abound. So with that, I want to introduce the panel. What I'm going to do is just briefly have a sentence or two about each person and then let them say a little bit of what their organization does. And then we will come back to get into really all of the exciting science and activities that are going on in the region. So let me start with David. David Fontana is Umoja Biopharma's Chief Business and Strategy Officer. He's worked in Seattle biotech since 2006. A number of companies that many of you will recognize: Zymogenetics, BMS, what was then Seattle Genetics, now Seagen, Juno, Celgene, and others. Let me turn it over to David to say a little bit about Umoja.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I've had a great run in Seattle and very proud to be on this panel today. I think it reflects exactly like you said, the growth of the biotech industry, particularly in the spaces that Terry and I are very involved with. So Umoja is still a startup company. I look back, we're immune therapy companies. So we work on immune therapies, either the cell or gene versions of those. So trying to tackle cancer with novel approaches, using your immune system to trigger responses to kill cancers. I reflect back, the company was 30 people a year ago today, and today we're at 140 people. So quite a bit of growth, and wonderful to be able to represent that today. We're split though, that we made the decision of having our core and our hub and research in Seattle, and we'll talk, I'm sure, a lot about why that's a good move. But we've decided to build our manufacturing out in Boulder, Colorado, for the reasons, frankly, there was nobody else plopping down there. There's a ton of talent in Boulder, Colorado, so we thought that was a wise move to move out there. But we've also employed this idea that information workers can be remote. So we have employees now in 14 states, which of course brings payroll and HR issues for a small company. But really excited to be here on the panel today and looking forward to the discussion, Mark.
Thanks, David. Next is Terry Foy. Terry leads the Immuno-Oncology and Cell Therapy Group Research Center at BMS here. She, like David, has been around the industry as far back as I can remember. Let me turn it over to Terry to tell you a little bit about what BMS is doing in the region.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, just for background, I came to Seattle 25 years ago for my first job in biotech, and I've worked both in small biotech startup companies as well as now at Bristol Myers Squibb in Seattle. And I'm proud to be part of the Seattle-based Bristol Myers Squibb, where, as David alluded to, we're one of the leaders in cell therapies, using your own immune cells to fight cancer and eventually other diseases. And our team in Seattle is about 1,500 people between Seattle and Bothell. We have in Seattle teams working on discovery, engineering, and figuring out how to scale up those cell therapies. And then in Bothell, we have a team that's actually manufacturing those cell therapies for patients in the marketplace. And I'm really proud to say that David, as well as others, helped pioneer this cell therapies and immune therapies in the region. And BMS came to be the leader in cell therapies, having the only company to have 2 approved cell therapies in the US, and now being approved in other countries as well. But that all started with people from the Seattle region, both from academics and small biotech companies like Juno, pioneering that science, and then companies like Celgene and Bristol Myers Squibb recognizing the value of those therapies and bringing strong pharmaceutical industry experience and financing to be able to take those very innovative medicines to a broader patient population and getting them approved. So we're excited to be part of this ecosystem in Seattle. It's very strong and thriving, as David said. And we're actually located, we have 3 locations in the South Lake Union area, as well as our Bothell site. So happy to be part of this community and see that it's come through very strong over the last decade or so. So thanks for including me in the panel.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Next up is Hillary Hammond from Fred Hutch. She's the Vice President of Business Development there, which means she is in charge of working with all of their partnerships with industry and other folks, mostly focused on curing cancer, but oftentimes other things as well. The Hutch has been fundamental to so many of the new startups in the region. Hillary, tell everybody a little bit about what the Hutch is doing.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with the group today. I hope it's safe to say that Fred Hutch is fairly well known in the region as a 45-year kind of stalwart in the cancer research and academic medical space. Obviously, we have of late also really pivoted due to COVID and focused a lot of our efforts on the vaccine and infectious diseases division that we have that can sometimes be underrepresented, I would say, when people think about what Fred Hutch does. Obviously, oncology is our primary focus, cancer treatments, mission-driven organization to end suffering due to cancer and related diseases. But infectious diseases are often highly associated with cancerous outcomes. So we do have a very strong faculty roster in this space. So due to COVID, obviously, we pivoted significantly in that direction. So have had a large impact in the last 2 years in terms of testing, validating, designing vaccine trials that we all are benefiting from right now. So, and as Mark said, my team specifically gets the pleasure of working with very entrepreneurially, translationally oriented faculty members and thinking about how we take their amazing research from the lab, find the right partners, find the right exits, find the right commercialization strategies, and really push them out into the commercial space via newcos, via partnerships with, with biotech or pharma, and get them to a position where they can actually make it to the clinic, into the patient. And we've obviously had the pleasure of working with everybody else on the panel in some manner or another to partner around technologies developed at Fred Hutch. So I've been in Seattle for almost 6 years now. So I've I hope to have had some effect between me and my team and the faculty at Fred Hutch in kind of accelerating the scene in biotech in Seattle. So thank you.
Thanks. So right now, Fred Hutch has been incredible, both on the company development side, but particularly, we'll get to this later. I mean, on COVID, not just national, but international leadership there. It's been truly incredible to watch. Next up is Kathy Smith. She is Senior Vice President, Human Resources and Legal Affairs at Nanostring Technologies. Kathy's one of those folks that always has kind of the big picture in mind, which is why, in addition to that role, she serves on the Chamber's Policy Leadership Group, and she's actually chair of the board of trustees at Fred Hutch, and member of the trustees at the United Way as well. So a number of different roles in the community in addition to her great work at Nanostring. Kathy, tell us a little bit about what Nanostring does.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me. Nanostring is a public company with our headquarters in South Lake Union, and we focus on developing and manufacturing research products that are used by scientists to envision and observe genes and protein activity in tissue samples. We're used by discovery and translational researchers to do scientific research. Our headquarters, as I mentioned, South Lake Union, but we have manufacturing up in Bothell. We're about 750 employees now. We have global offices in Europe and Asia as well. We were founded in 2003, actually, and spun out of Institute of Systems Biology here in Seattle. The technology that we use was invented by Leroy Hood, who many of you may know. I'm excited to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Kathy. And I think that it makes one of the points here, so Leroy worked in that, decades ago, right? So, oftentimes in biotech and life sciences, it's not a year or two to market, it's a decade or two. And so a couple of folks here will probably touch on that. So with that, like I said, there's so much incredible stuff going on in Seattle and the greater Puget Sound region right now. I want to sort of spend a little time diving in a little bit deeper as to, why these companies are here and some of the attributes of the region. So maybe Terry, let's start with you, and talk a little bit, not just about what BMS is doing, but really when we think about cell and gene therapy and immunotherapies, why here?
Yeah, Mark, thank you. I mean, I will say, starting with the big picture for Bristol Myers Squibb, we have our research sites and our therapeutic research centers located in areas of strong academic centers and strong industry expertise. So across the United States, we have 5 of these different research centers, and Seattle is our main one for immuno-oncology and cell therapies. And the reason that we do that is it's twofold. We are looking for regions that have a thriving scientific core with lots of people that we can tap into for collaboration and partnership, but also to be able to recruit talent in that region. So the examples of the Fred Hutch, Seattle Children's, and the University of Washington, we tap into for partnerships and collaboration on the science side, but then we also use the talent in the region that sometimes come from those institutions, but also come from the other companies that are growing and evolving in the region. And in particular, Seattle has a strong history with the Fred Hutch being pioneers in bone marrow transplantation, in the kinds of clinical research that you need to do to develop the medicines that we're developing. So cell and gene therapy also has a history here in Seattle with targeted genetics from years ago. So that expertise has kind of stayed in Seattle, and it's now one of the centers of excellence for cell and gene therapy. And one of the advantages of that is that, for example, as Juno grew and thrived and hence was acquired eventually by Bristol Myers Squibb, the consequence of that was that a number of people then were able to launch new companies and new startup opportunities in Seattle, taking that expertise and distributing it to new ideas and new innovative companies, building off of that foundation. So it's sort of a feed forward kind of cycle of innovation that we've had here, and it comes from the long history of expertise, but also the growing expertise by people staying here and deciding to take technology and build new companies in the region instead of going somewhere else. So it's a big advantage to our ecosystem that we've been able to do that.
Great. Maybe let's go to David next. David, why don't you talk a little bit? You've obviously done quite a bit of work with children's and in the pediatric space, right? Talk a little bit about what those partnerships have looked like.
Sort of thing. I wanted to start with a cute little anecdote, but when I joined, I was at Zymo Genetics and I was working on immuno-oncology back in the day. And I recall giving a presentation at a national congress, and nobody showed up except for a couple of people. And one person was a guy named John Thompson, who was at just a stalwart at Fred Hutch, right? And I used to count the steps between my office and his office and go to the grand rounds on Fridays with his team. They were very welcoming, and it felt like a cluster of kind of wannabes or never wannabes kind of people. And you play that forward till today, that Terry's point made so nicely, that this is what we do well here in Seattle, right? And we do it very well, and you got an expertise, rivaling. And here's where I like to brag a little bit. There's no other city that has 2 CAR Ts approved that came out of a work done there, right, than Seattle. So exactly. And you'll see a lot more to come, a lot more efforts from Terry's organization and the little companies around the area. So a little bit about Umoja. It was really founded by 3 folks from Seattle with the Seattle Children's, a fellow named Mike Jensen, who was a pioneer and was one of the founders of Juno, had some really good ideas. He connected with our CEO, Andy Schaffenberger, and who had great ideas as well, and some technology and a lot of experience in developing, working with Bluebird, for example, and developing the vector biology that became the BMS drug called the Abecma. Andy worked on. And then finally, a fellow from Purdue kind of got together and said, if we're going to do something, we're never going to compete with the companies that do this stuff well. Let's take these integrated technologies and look out 10 years from now and say, what can we do that would leapfrog and kind of drive the medicine a little bit further out there. So it's kind of our MO, is it's like we are doing things a little bit differently. And I'll give you an example of that. So we have hunkered down on saying, let's use the body to manufacture. So instead of taking your cells out of Fred Hutch and shipping up to Bothell, our technology allows you to try to grow the cells, the same kind of CAR T cells, right in the human body in vivo. So state right up front is unproven technologies besides little mice and maybe some dog data coming up, but you can see the vision, and that would have never happened without the foundations of what the cell genes and Bristols and Junos and things drove here. So I really give a lot of credit. We're starting a study in the first half of this year with Fred Hutch, right, in pediatric osteosarcoma, using a combination of our technologies and what Mike Jensen had in place. And we frankly Terry mentioned she has 3 sites. We have 3 much smaller little sites in Seattle as well. One of them is in the Cure Building, the Seattle Children's Cure Building. We rent space from Mike to be there. So talk about wonderful collaborations of academic and industry. It's just fantastic, fantastic plays there. And he keeps working with us under, research agreements and coming up with more and more novel ideas. So really exciting time to work with the interplay of academics and such. And then one last comment, we can't forget University of Washington Immunology program as another source of, I don't know what they're feeding them there, but these kids come out of that program already wiser than most folks I've ever worked with in career, understanding data, and they've fallen into a wonderful situation in Seattle to go from a postdoc situation or even a bachelor's degree into RA jobs and in spaces. Terry employs probably half of them in the city. Just wonderful learning opportunities and to work on things they're going to get to patients. That is so unique for a young researcher. So applaud to University of Washington Immunology program as well.
Thanks for that, David. Let's pivot a little bit here and have Kathy go next. Talk a little bit. So many years in both the device and diagnostic industries. Talk a little bit about what Nanostring's doing and how that industry is a little bit different than the biotech side.
Yeah, we are not in the diagnostics business right now. We have been in the past, but right now we're focused on research products in our spatial biology franchise, which is increasingly a very important part of scientific research. So we have 2 platforms. We're about to launch a 3rd, which will enable researchers to actually look at single cell genetic protein activity in single cells at the subcellular level. So we continue to sort of innovate in that space and meet the needs of translational and discovery researchers. I'll add just to what Terry and David have said about the ecosystem here. We do work with researchers who help us, kind of refine products. We're also moving into the cloud as well, because these spatial biology products produce a huge amount of data. And that's what people want, to be able to analyze that data. So we are going to be offering a kind of a cloud computing, service for our customers, and being able to tap the talent here. Obviously, there's the businesses here. You've got all the major tech companies that provide cloud services, but there's also a lot of great data scientists that are on a scientific advisory board here that have been instrumental in advising us. So again, there's many ways that collaboration happens in this ecosystem.
Yeah, that's such an important point, Kathy. I mean, so many of the companies in this region have, we sort of call it convergence, where you've got both the biological sciences background, but bringing in the data sciences has become such an important trend in the last couple of years, and has fueled so much the growth of local companies. That's a great point. Okay, let's finish up here with Hillary. Obviously, Hutch has been in many of these conversations, but tell everybody a little bit about your role, and I'll let you because there's so much Hutch could talk about. I'll let you choose which part you want to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Terry and David and Kathy, who, by the way, it's not at all intimidating to be on a panel with the chairman of your board, by the way, Kathy. So,
let me just say, Hillary's a rock star at the Hutch, so there's no way she should be intimidated.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's interesting. Everybody's covered a lot of the talking points that I typically go to when I talk about the Hutch and how it participates as part of the region, how it really peppers the innovation around the region. Obviously, what I feel is most, I think, impactful about Fred Hutch is not just that, we were and continue to be pioneers in the cell and gene therapy space. I mean, as Terry mentioned, bone marrow transplant was a Fred Hutch innovation. So we've been at the table and leading the conversation since day one, right? And the good thing is that those voices, those minds, those those innovators stayed at Fred Hutch. They educated the faculty around them. They continued to innovate throughout their career. And we continue to benefit from it, both as an organization and as a patient, you know, as a patient provider of therapies. So those innovators as early pioneers have really continued to build the next generation of cell and gene therapists at Fred Hutch. And I think I particularly can see it because those people that grew up, you know, and evolved in the labs of Stan Riddell and Phil Greenberg, you know, as postdoc and now professors, they're the ones that are now like the most active in terms of attracting new partnerships to Seattle. So, you know, the Stan and Phil they are obviously still hugely active and spinning out companies, you know, like Lyle and similar. The next generation are really the ones that are attracting the venture money, the biotech, the pharma interest, and it's interesting because there's so much activity. Obviously, cell and gene therapy is like the hottest kind of place to put an investment bet from a VC standpoint. There's so much interest that the creeping largest problem that I'm having, one is fearing that our shelves are going to be bare in terms of what we have available to partner, because we've been so successful in bringing people in and starting new companies and doing licensing deals that, like, I personally start worrying about, like, oh my gosh, we've partnered everything so quickly, like, you know, innovation isn't keeping up necessarily with the speed of partnering, which is a good problem to have. So I'm not going to complain about it. But, you know, and alongside of that, it's just like a very boring thing to consider is like, I spend a lot of my time talking about managing conflicts among faculty because everybody seems to have a partner, right? So, you know, so it's hard to like, conflict management plans are a big part of my daily life because we have so many people at the table and you have to make sure that it's all, you know, well organized, well managed from that standpoint. So yeah, it's been a really, really exciting, you know, few years at Fred Hutch. And I think that's to the benefit of everybody from the patient to the region. So it's great.
Thanks. And having worked at a large research institute myself, I mean, it is, you know, either the institution is committed to doing these partnerships or it's not in their DNA. And I can tell you, it is just an incredible benefit to this region to have the Hutch and have the Hutch be so committed to doing those partnerships. It's just been a huge change. So some of you have already touched on this, so I'll sort of let people choose if they want to sort of go deeper into the question, but I want to talk a little bit about sort of, as you step back, you know, is there anything to add in terms of what's really special about this region right now? So not just Seattle, but the greater Puget Sound region in terms of being a place to be growing a life science company right now.
I can start and maybe touch on something that Kathy alluded to, which is there's a lot of technology here in Seattle that's you know, in the machine learning, artificial intelligence space, and and that's true in other regions as well. But we're a fairly small community for that, and so the connections to thinking about the cross section of applying, you know, our science and our drug development and our innovative drug discovery technology with the computing power and the minds that are developing machine learning tools and artificial intelligence. It's a really special opportunity for us to be able to leverage that locally. And I can tell you for the last few years, we've done this Women in Tech conference here and hosted it in Seattle. And we've had workshops with local, you know, people working in the tech business. And when they hear what we're doing in life sciences and the amount of data that we generate and the computing power we need to analyze that and think about how to make our drugs better or to think about the next generation of drugs, it's really exciting to them to think about applying their skill set to our space so that, you know, trying to leverage that cohesive and make that cohesive partnerships is, I think, one of the special things about this region. In addition to all the expertise we have on the science side for what we're working on, this really complements that expertise.
Yeah, and I'll just add, putting my human resources hat on, I mean, it's a great place to get talent, but it's a competitive place to get talent. So we're all fighting for the same talent. But we hope that the universities keep churning out, graduates that we can employ, more of them, please. But we also compete not only with each other, but with tech companies. You try to hire a software person. It's tough. It's really tough. So that's one of the challenges, I guess. But it's also one of the benefits. Good to have that problem, I guess. But we need more of all of that talent.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and to some extent, I feel like the Hutch is the victim of its own success, because we spin out companies with the intentional ask of keeping them in Seattle and having the headquarters be in the region, and then we set it up so that all of our well-trained scientists in the cell and gene therapy area are now sort of moving into even our own NUCOs. I've lost people on my team actually to a NUCO that we started. So, and it's good, and it's great actually for the people and for the talent, and to have those options, particularly coming out of postdoc programs or newly minted PhDs that actually have a lot of flexibility in the career pathway they can take. That it will only make the region more attractive to the younger scientists that are choosing where they're going to pursue their education. If Seattle has a premise that you can get your PhD here, you can stay here, you can work in biotech and mature in the region, it's only going to be more attractive to those younger scientists. So
just a final comment. I think what Terry does very well in her shop, and I'm sure it happens at Seattle Genetics and will happen in many of these companies like Adaptive, the technology companies that bring a lot to the table, is we take academic scientists and come out of school and train them to be industrial, applied scientists, right? How to develop drugs, how to think about things, the regulatory aspects, the documentation. Everyone hates documentation. It's all the part of the game that has to get done. And I think it would not be the same if we didn't have a Celgene or Bristol Myers Squibb and Seattle Genetics. There would be a bunch of research companies that would fumble and have to sell themselves off to somebody else. Now I think that just the foundation is really strong here with the companies and the expertise that has been built by people who have seen successful products and understand how to get things to the clinic.
Yeah, great point. I mean, I think, though painful for each company individually, trying to find the talent, certainly the ecosystem is stronger by folks that have that experience moving through multiple companies, coming out of academia and into corporate life as well. So it feels like the ecosystem is working well in that regard right now. Let's pivot a little bit and just ask the question, since it is a chamber event, just in terms of place and that kind of thing. Are there, we've talked about all the incredible stuff going on and why this is an incredible region to be in. Are there some challenges that we should be thinking about on the forefront or be trying to manage as we look over the next couple of years?
Well, lab space is number one for all the small companies. Like, again, I mentioned we're in three places, but it's 12 people, 13 people in 3 places, and it happens to be a pretty big triangle. So not convenient, you know what I mean? Not convenient, and in that sense too. And it's just very competitive, right? We can't compete with getting new lab space with somebody who's more funded. I've heard a few companies actually lost space they thought they were going to get to, Google or Facebook recently on the North Dexter area, right? So it's troublesome because we're going to have to find places to put people who, companies don't, unless you have lab space, work doesn't get done, and you don't move products along. So I think it's one of our biggest concerns of how to keep growing lab space. And I hear it from all of my peer companies too, a big concern.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is I think it's always lab space has always been a challenge. The good news is there is considerable amount of lab space under development, but it is certainly challenging for the younger companies to be able to afford it.
Right.
Kathy?
Yeah, it may be obvious to some people, but a lot of our employees cannot work from home. They are in labs. They have to be in labs. Mm-hmm. And for us, we have manufacturing as well, and we need people to go to the manufacturing location up in Bothell. And we actually manufacture some in South Lake Union too. And it has to do with the challenge of getting people back to work. and some of the public safety issues. Where in South Lake Union, it's pretty empty. More and more, we are right near Amazon, which has a lot of buildings and a lot of people. More of those people seem to be out and about, but by far nothing like it was pre-COVID. So, we would like to see everyone come back, at least some of the time, because our employees like to see a busy neighborhood. They like to feel more secure in a busy neighborhood. It's more fun to be here when there's a lot more people out and about and a lot more activity in the restaurants and so on and so forth, and the food trucks and all those things that Amazon brings to the neighborhood. So, we'd love to see our neighbors, not just Amazon, everyone, come back at some point, hopefully in the near future. Needless to say, public safety is a challenge throughout the whole city, and something that we're optimistic and hopeful that the new mayor will be able to address.
Yeah, Kathy, I think you hit on maybe one of the double-edged swords of the success of Seattle growth. We have huge amount of growth in the downtown Seattle core, but it's also brought some challenges with public safety, transportation, those kinds of things. Those challenges maybe shifted a bit during COVID, when essentially the downtown was, everybody started working from home, and now it's nowhere near kind of the thriving environment it was before. Even though, as you say, most of our groups in our various companies or institutions have been working throughout the pandemic, because we need to be working in the labs and because we're doing critical things for developing medicines. So yeah, I think there's a sort of a balance of, we want to have this thriving downtown South Lake Union area, but at the same time, we need to have the infrastructure to support that once people come back, and that's public safety and transportation pieces. Lab space, as David mentioned, is critical, and yeah, I think there's definitely plans for adding to that over the coming years. But part of that is navigating around it. We have 3 sites, in pretty close proximity to each other, but it takes a long time to get a half a mile from one of our sites to the other because of the transportation challenges. And I'll just put a plug in for, I know this is Seattle Chamber, but for our colleagues in Bothell, navigating to and from Bothell from our Seattle sites is also quite challenging. And so having, again, transportation infrastructure to help support that is important.
Yeah, and I endorse everything that has been brought up, from transportation to lab space. Even Fred Hutch is, in conversation about our lab space, and we are a research center that should have plenty of lab space, and even us as an organization and the growth trajectory that we're hoping to achieve. I mean, lab space is an issue that we talk about as well. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that from an academic standpoint, kind of touching on what I was talking about earlier in terms of attracting younger scientists. The cost of living obviously is always going to be an issue. Housing prices make it difficult to convince somebody from, a less expensive part of the country to move to Seattle, particularly if you're talking about somebody that's going to be on a postdoc or, paid through grants. That's very difficult. It makes it a lot more difficult to convince them that Seattle's, worth it from a cost standpoint. And then there's also the issue of the slicer, the kind of archetype of person that we're trying to attract. The younger scientists are often in the phases of their life where they're having children. They're looking to start families, and honestly, the cost of childcare and the availability in Seattle of childcare that would be available to people in that space, it's really hard. I mean, I moved here with 3 children, and I really it was part of my discussion on whether I was going to come was contingent on whether there was going to be a space for my 4-year-old daughter at the time. So it was a driving factor in relocation. So
as long as San Francisco's prices go up more quickly, we are able to hang in there. So it sounds like maybe the takeaway here is, while we've had a many year discussion on the Cascade Corridor, putting a high-speed rail between Vancouver and Portland. Maybe we can start with Seattle to Bothell and go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good first step.
Okay, let's pivot here a little bit and talk about, I mean, this industry's impact on COVID has been, nothing short of stunning. And, regionally, we had obviously the first case here. We also, within 30 to 60 days, I can't remember which one it was. I mean, the first clinical trial for any COVID vaccine was done right here in Seattle, and that's because we have incredible expertise here. The other thing that has always struck me has been, well, we've got an incredible public health system here. That public health system has really relied on the expertise that sits in so many of either these organizations or research institutes in terms of answering the scientific questions, in terms of what to do next, which has really given this region an ability to deal with COVID in a way that other places haven't. And at the same time, I mean, the impact isn't just local, it's frankly global. And I'll maybe turn to Hillary to talk a little bit about that. I mean, the Hutch, has done many things, including run, all of Project Warp Speed's clinical trials, which allowed us to get vaccines out in a year, which had never been done before. I think most of us would have told you, an accelerated vaccine approval would have been, 3 to 5 years, and that would have been really fast. And so let me just turn over to Hillary first, and then anybody else to talk a little bit about things that have happened in this region that have really had global impact on COVID, but also if there's other topics that you think, we're really making our mark globally on, share that, because it's an exciting time. So Hillary, a little bit about the Hutch's impact on vaccine development.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge softball question for me, Mark, because it's I think, but for Fred Hutch, we would not be in the position we are today with respect to vaccines and pandemic response. Obviously, the pivot that Fred Hutch faculty, not just in the vaccines and infectious diseases division, but across the board, the pivot that they made, almost overnight in terms of what their research was focused on, is nothing short of astonishing, to be honest. It was absolutely remarkable to see an entire culture, entire research base absolutely shift into response mode immediately. So from that standpoint, I will always look back in this time and be incredibly grateful and humbled to be working at the organization to watch that happen. It was personally it was amazing. I mean, nothing short from retrofitting an entire building, like within months, to host clinical trials that, for patients, and then the air handling, the re-engineering of entire large pieces of capital infrastructure to be able to not just design, build, and run the trials, but then ultimately to turn, a huge part of the organization into a vaccine clinic where we could deliver vaccines to the community, which, obviously I got my vaccine at Fred Hutch. My son, my 12-year-old son, when he went in, he got his, and it was really interesting to walk him into my office, or my office building, where he had been in the past, just having lunch with me, to come in and get a vaccine. And he was like, "Mom, that used to be the salad bar." And I'm like, "Yep, it used to be the salad bar. Now we're here getting your vaccine." So, I mean, I can't express enough the amazement that I have to be part of that organization, and the respect that I have for the faculty who work overnight tirelessly for a year to make that happen. Obviously, Larry Corey is a huge part of the environment, the ecosystem. I mean, I laugh because he's always referencing his friend Tony, which, it's like, yeah, that's how close the Hutch is to the epicenter of like changing the dynamic and of the pandemic. So.
Well, it is both short-term and long-term, right? I mean, in terms of I was stunned at that too. I mean, repurposing an entire building to basically do industry partnerships and vaccine development is incredible. But at the same time, some of Larry and other people's work, I mean, that goes all the way back to HIV trials.
Yep,
that,
absolutely.
Was expertise built decades ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the HIV Trials Network has been a industry standard vaccine trial network for a decade, and that was all of the infrastructure and all of the program management, all of the trial designs that were employed, geared and aimed at HIV, were just immediately repurposed and put to good work and good use in developing the COVID vaccine. So that was, there was a reason that the Hutch was selected as the warp speed site, and that's a large part of it.
Other folks in comments?
Yeah, I can comment. Well, first I want to say, I can't echo enough what Hillary said about the work that the Fred Hutch did. It's had global impact and blazing the trail for recovery from COVID. So, I'll say a few things about what Bristol Myers has done, but it pales in comparison to what the Fred Hutch has contributed. We're not a vaccine company, nor are we an infectious disease company. Our main focus is oncology and autoimmune disease, but because we have strong experience with immune response and developing therapies, either for autoimmunity or oncology, one of the things that we did as a company, and some of that work was contributed by people in Seattle, was look at repurposing our approved drugs, our approved therapies to treat other things like lung inflammation, and use those for treating patients very early on in COVID. Other companies did this as well, but there was a real conscious cross-industry collaboration to quickly screen through drugs that could help in that very early on, way before vaccines were available, to see, can we minimize the symptoms, minimize the serious complications of COVID. So that's one of the things that our company did. But we also then developed a monoclonal antibody therapy, again in collaboration with academic institutes in the New York region. Again, leveraging what we know about the immune response to COVID and selecting antibodies that could neutralize the virus and making them into a therapeutic treatment that you could give patients upon infection to minimize the consequences of the infection. And then really at the grassroots, I know everybody in Seattle who was in life sciences did similar things, but we had our scientists volunteering at testing sites. We had them helping out at the Fred Hutch or the UW when there was overwhelming and really early testing, and it was critical. And we had people who were, we were in the labs for the most of the time, but in the beginning we had our people stay home for about a month. But in that window, whether it was before or after they were back at work, people were volunteering to help with testing. We were donating supplies, PPE, and all those kinds of things. It was a real community effort, I would say, across the whole life sciences industry in Seattle to contribute things like that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things in terms of development was, we saw that across the board, that we were able to do science so much faster because the collaboration wall is just, everything came down and people just said, look, we're in this together and, we're going to figure it out, as opposed to, each company develop its own pipeline kind of product. And it was really stunning to watch. The collaborations over the course of a year where people just said, we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah, it was amazing. I think, big companies who had, our competitors, they were competitors during the whole time of COVID, said, put that aside, we're going to work together to figure out the best drugs to make or to use. Yeah.
Other thoughts on that before we go to the next question? So let's look forward a little bit, putting COVID behind us here. As we think over next maybe 3 to 5 years, where do you guys see both the scene going here and kind of any of the next big things coming on the science front or from your companies in terms of what's Seattle going to be known for 5 years from now?
Oh, interesting.
Well, I can start by saying something about what David and his companies like his are doing. Again, today at our Bristol Myers Squibb sites in Seattle, we're making cell therapies. We're engineering that, what the design looks like, but that involves taking cells from a patient, doing all kinds of engineering to them, and then growing them up to large numbers and then putting them back into the patients. But the future, as David's company and other companies are doing, is how can we minimize that manipulation, reduce the cost of that, and in some ways not tie it specifically to the patient cells, because those patient cells are not always the healthiest, but deliver those medicines directly without all this sort of outside the patient manipulation and deliver some programming, DNA or RNA or protein directly to the patients that can do the same thing. And that's sort of the next wave of innovation in cell and gene therapies. And we have a bunch of companies in Seattle working on those things, including Emoja. And I think that is where we'll see the innovation pace pick up significantly. And it won't take us 20 years to get the CAR T-cell therapy approved. Hopefully the next wave of those therapies can happen more quickly because so many more people are working on them. I think that's one of the strengths that Seattle has. We have probably a half a dozen companies working in those areas with all doing different kinds of innovation, and then partnering with companies like ours who can then take it to the more industrial scale and commercializable level.
Yeah.
I also think there's going to be an evolution of, oh, sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
No, go ahead, David.
I think it's going to be an evolution of, right now, I would really say it's fundamentally a research-based and translational-based city, right? We have little pockets. Seattle Genetics, of course, has an army doing clinical trials, but the rest of us really not. So, and I find that rather surprising given all the talent at Fred Hutch, and not that we're trying to steal your talent, Hillary, but just all the train from Seattle children's stuff. Eventually companies like us are going to have to figure out, are we running our own clinical trials? We're going to have to partner everything away again and lose value. It'll be a very interesting turning point because, Boston and San Francisco have done a good job of bringing the clinical talent from UCSF and building companies like Genentech. It'll be a nice transition over the 5 years when we're all faced with these big clinical trials. Do we go down that path, or do we partner away to big pharma?
Yeah, and I would say for Nanostring, we're in this field of spatial biology, and we're really driven by this mission to help scientists see more and more biology and discover more and more biology. I mean, we're at the point where they can look at molecular interactions in 3D. It's like think of it as a GPS for biology, if you will. And we think that's going to drive some incredible innovation as we begin to understand how various parts of the cell interact, where are cells in a tumor, how they relate to each other. So we're really excited about that, and that's a growing field. We have a lot of competitors located elsewhere, but I would expect to see some sprout up here as well. And I just say we're continuing to grow. I mean, fully 1/3 of our employees were hired last year alone.
Wow.
So 30% were onboarded remotely. And that's a challenge, but we're planning on hiring, maybe not quite that many, but a number of people this year. We have an ambitious hiring plan. So I think that I don't think we're the only company who's continuing to hire. It's a competitive talent market. It's just really, really hard, especially in certain areas. I mean, if anyone knows a regulatory affairs person who wants a job, please send them our way. I mean, that tells you something, right? I mean, that is pretty amazing, because you used to be able to hire them pretty easily three or 4 years ago, and now they're at a premium. So I think that's going to be a trend, not just for Nanostring, but for a lot of other companies as well.
Kathy, I just wanted to add, I think you're totally right on the companies like Nanostring and Adaptive that are both local, really being on the forefront of technology that enables us to learn from the research we're doing. I mean, every one of us on the panel has a huge investment in, understanding the translational biology, what's happening with our drugs, how do they work, how can we make them better, and the tools that your company and Adaptive and other companies make to enable that are really critical to that mission.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, we have some great partnerships with a lot of companies as well that are helping us drive that innovation. Excited about that.
And Mark,
Yeah, and I would just add that I think the other, in addition to finding the really top scientific talent, I mean, the other thing that has changed the last couple of years is, and both Nanostring and BMS are manufacturing here, is that people used to think of this as just kind of a bunch of research folks, an industry of researchers, right? And while that is absolutely critical, as Kathy was pointing out, people doing regulatory affairs, but there are also literally hundreds of jobs open right now for folks that largely come with a high school or a certificate degree to work in manufacturing, which I think folks probably aren't always aware of. So the industry has really broadened out in terms of its workforce. It spans really everything from high school all the way up to postdocs, which is, I think, in many ways, a healthy development for the region.
Yeah.
And it's not just scientific talent. I mean, try hiring a recruiter these days. Try, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is, we have some liberal arts people too. So it's not just scientists, it is across the board competitive, and there's great opportunities. So I would really say to everyone on this call, you're young people, you're graduates, have them go to the Life Science Washington job board and apply, please. We've all got our jobs listed there.
Yeah.
Or come to nanostring.com too.
And Mark, maybe I'll put a little different twist on the initial question, which is, where do we see Seattle in 5 years? My answer is that I'm happy to say I have no idea what the answer to that question is, because I have the pleasure of every day talking to a scientist who comes up with something absolutely new, right? That could be groundbreaking, the cutting edge, right? So, I like the fact that I have no idea what's going to come out of the collective brain trust at Fred Hutch that's going to be like a game-changing technology. So yes, we'll continue to be like known for cell and gene therapy. We've continued to make strides in democratizing, availability of cell and gene therapies versus, by, having out of the box ways of, creating cells. But to be honest, I kind of like the fact that I don't know what's ever going to come out.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be in the industry, because we
It
are
really
sort
is.
of at that pivot from, doing sort of traditional small molecule drugs to really, the next generation innovation that is just, like you said, too hard to predict right now, which is a fun place to be. Okay, so last question here before we open up to some questions from the audience. Talk a little bit about equity. So equity and access has really been a crucial piece of the region's economic recovery. And can you talk a little bit about what you are doing to include underrepresented communities in the work, in your work, or more broadly, how you're helping maybe smaller companies get access to capital? And we talked a little bit about lab space for smaller companies that have different challenges than the big ones. Just what you're doing in sort of either diversity, equity, inclusion, or growing the next generation.
I missed the point that Hilary was going to give Umoja some lab space, but we'll have to talk about it.
I'll run your clinical trial.
That must have been very subtle there.
Mark, I can give one example that we're doing. We have a number of initiatives, but I think the one that we are really we're excited about a lot of them, but the one we're most excited about is partnering with Washington Mesa, which is the organization that works with STEM students in community colleges, and bringing in some interns through that program from underrepresented groups. And we have found that they can do very well in our manufacturing operations. These particular folks, that was their interest. And we're looking to expand that. So that's been a really new thing for us that we're very happy with.
And I can touch on some of the things that Bristol Myers is doing globally, but local, and I can comment on how that connects locally. One of the things that we committed to as a company was being able to expand our clinical trial testing to underrepresented communities, and accessing patients who maybe don't typically think about an investigational medicine or being on a clinical trial. So we've committed to training clinical trial investigators that are of diverse underrepresented groups, so that patients can connect to them, can connect to a physician who they can relate to. We've committed to broadening the geographies in which we do those clinical trials as well, not just training the investigators, and then accessing those at-risk patients with support programs. So those are kind of the pillars of this initiative that BMS as a company as a whole is working on, and some of the sites for the initial effort are based in Seattle, and some of the training of investigators is happening in Seattle. So that's one big thing. But on a more kind of grassroots level, we're very engaged in STEM activities and supporting STEM initiatives across the region, including supporting Washington State Opportunity Scholars, supporting UW-Bothell and Shoreline Community College to train high school graduates to work in our manufacturing plant and things like that. So I think our commitment to STEM and training of the next generation of people to work in our labs and in our manufacturing plants is really important to us as well.
Yeah, Terry, I agree. I mean, the vaccine work that we've done over the last 2 years and prior, obviously, we have really put a very fine-tuned focus on diversification of the people that we're bringing into the trial. I mean, it's hugely important, and it has hugely, particularly with the COVID spotlight, that we need to have representation from all of the comers that are going to be taking these vaccines, and without the diversification of the trial pool and patient pool, we're missing a lot of critical data that ensures that the vaccines are safe and efficacious for everybody. So it's been a huge push at Fred Hutch. It's been punctuated by COVID, and I think it was one of the positive things that came out of the COVID response, is that we've really sat up and took notice of the fact that we need to do better about that from a scientific standpoint.
Just a quick comment. We can't do as much as the big companies as a little private company, but it's a major focus of ours. And just a few things I wanted to note here is that one of the things we looked at is lowering our educational requirements and basing it more on years of experience. You used to always have to have a PhD to get into the door. We've said there's a lot of good people that can do this work without PhDs now, and so we've really done a good job, I think, of tapping into that talent. And then, like some other folks, we're sponsoring scholarships for underrepresented groups. That happens to be in Colorado, Colorado U, but similar programs undermined here. I did want to make just echo, and I don't want to bury it too deep. Terry, you made a really interesting observation about Hillary followed up with that on the underrepresentation of I had a project when I was at one of the big pharma companies. I looked through 400 different clinical trials with multiple investigators. There wasn't a single Black investigator on any of the trials, and guess what? There was only a handful of Black patients on all those trials. So right there just shows you we as a pharma industry, we're not doing our job well. So I'm glad to hear about these initiatives.
So let me follow up on that. There's a couple of questions here regarding sort of tapping different talent pools. So whether it be folks from the Great Resignation that want to change industries, tapping folks remotely that we didn't have access to as a region previously. Just thoughts and comments on sort of over the next couple of years, ability to tap other sort of non-traditional groups to bring them into the industry to meet this incredible growing demand for folks.
I think David touched on one of the things, and we're doing something similar, which is rethinking the requirements for education and experience in some of our roles, because there is all kinds of experience and educational training, and we've absolutely done that for our manufacturing roles, but we're even doing it for some of our lab-based scientists, broadening the pool of candidates that we consider and not sticking kind of to the rigid traditional educational backgrounds. I think that's a really important piece. And I'd say also the flexible ways of working that have emerged from COVID, allowing people to potentially work either full-time or part-time remotely, because we know we've demonstrated that can be successful. Obviously, we still need people in our labs to do the wet lab research, but a lot of the other functions can be done either partially or even sometimes fully in a remote setting, which I think gives us access to more people contributing to the roles.
And I can tell you one of the priorities for us, having listened to all this, is I think Terry, you're right that some of those barriers to sort of traditional four-year degrees and others are definitely coming down. I think so. One of the challenges now that we've got as a region is building that educational capacity. So as you had mentioned, over the last couple of years, we've been working with Shoreline on some credentialing for either a stackable credential or maybe a 2-year degree. So, a couple different routes there. Likewise with Lake Washington Tech, more on the medical device side, same thing. I mean, you can literally have no industry experience and in 2 quarters, be hired straight out of the program. So there are those, and then at organizations like UW-Bothell, which is expanding its STEM pipeline, really again trying to get different career tracks in there so that we have a wider array of non-traditional students that are able to get into the industry, over the next couple of years. So, we'll be working with those organizations along with many of the folks on the panel here. But that'll be a priority is expanding the variety of educational pathways into the industry.
Another source of talent we are tapping are veterans, and we are participating in a program called Hiring Our Heroes, which is sponsored by the military. And essentially, these are active military folks who are within 6 months of retiring from the military, and they're looking for jobs in the civilian sector. And so we have two of these folks. One is in HR, and I believe one is in logistics right now, who joined us in the last few weeks. And they're going to be with us for 3 months, and it may turn into a full-time job for them, but it gives them exposure to the civilian sector, gives them some experience. And I can tell you, the two people we have are just incredibly impressive because they've had incredible experiences and seen the world in ways that a lot of folks don't. And and the military trains them well. So we're really excited about that as well. And, as you may know, the military is fairly diverse. So there's a pretty good pool of diverse candidates that we can tap into.
Others? So maybe I think we're getting close to time here, unless Lee tells me differently. Maybe the last question, let me try to wrap a couple of the chat questions together. So as we look over the next, last year was stunning. We had 6 IPOs that came out of the region. More than that, if you count companies that are maybe headquartered in multiple locations. Over $5 billion of capital flowed into new companies last year. So first question is that an aberration? Is that the new normal? Do we think it's that kind of growth continues? And then a couple of folks, the perennial question always on the West Coast is can we be San Francisco? And so thoughts on sort of growth path and, where we sit in sort of the regional hubs for those of you making predictions.
Well, first of all, I'll say I don't want to be San Francisco.
I was going to say that. Thank you, Terry.
But I think we can compete on certain terms. We're not as big population-wise or geography-wise, but I think that in terms of depth of expertise and innovation, I absolutely think we can compete. I think we certainly compete on a lot of things that attract people to the area in terms of quality of life, outdoors, pace of life, all of those things I think are very positive for the region and other reason why I think we can compete with San Francisco. So I'll let others chime in.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting learning from venture capital firms that have been attracted to the Seattle area over the last 4 years that they actually just really like I don't want to be glib, but the vibe of Seattle, both from from an innovation standpoint and a work-life balance to the amazing just geography of the region. And to be honest, they also are it's a breath of fresh air, literally, figuratively, to not be in the Bay Area or Boston, Cambridge, which can be kind of an echo chamber of science at some point from an investment standpoint, I should say. But so I think we can be something similar. But again, Terry, I'm with you. I don't want to be San Francisco. I want to be Seattle, but Seattle at its best.
Hey, Mark, about your question about investment, last year was a bit of an anomaly because the stock market was going through the roof. The biotech index was just very favorable, and look at it today, very, very stressful times. And I think it's going to put a lot of reservation on investing in very early preclinical innovative companies, right? Probably good seed money, but folks want clinical validation before they make big investments, right? Or at least a path for clinical validation from an investment perspective. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a rough time until the tech stock market biotech stock market fixes itself up.
But I would also say I don't think consolidation and acquisition is always a bad thing. It triggers new companies coming out of that. It allows drugs to get all the way to the market and to more patients. So I think that there's a good balance of that cycle of innovation and then drug development, which both small companies and big companies can play pivotal roles in.
A good example of that, when Juno got bought by Celgene, it was just a better situation, right? We had a bigger army globally. It was a global presence. The drugs got approved in Japan and Europe. That would have never happened with Juno alone, right? And just
exactly.
The impact we can make through a acquisition is pretty huge. Good point, Terry.
And when you look at Juno, I think the execs from Juno have gone on to found at least 3 companies that I know of. So, innovation marches on.
Right.
You can't stop those brilliant minds. They're going to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the lasting impact. I think I tend to agree, David. I mean, it probably sustainable at the current investment levels. The industry tends to be counter-cyclical, and it's going to come off that peak a little bit. But I do think, to Hillary's point, it's been incredible coming through this, because some of the trends that we struggled with historically, small companies growing up and leaving, right? We've reversed that trend. Folks are staying. As Hillary points out, we used to have a handful of VCs that would check out the region. Now it's it's on that list of places you've got to keep tabs on what innovation's coming out of here. So I think those trends will continue, albeit maybe at, as you point out, slightly lower investment levels as we go through the cycle. I think that is all we have time for. I think we're at 12:15. I want to thank all the panelists. It's been a fabulous conversation. Let me turn it back. Lee, do you have any final comments before we sign off?
First of all, thank you so much to the panel and to you, Mark, for moderating. That was such an interesting conversation. And we have recorded it, so we will share it out if you want to check back on anything or share it with a colleague. I do want to thank our sponsors, our series sponsor, Advanced Professionals Insurance and Benefit Solutions, and our event sponsor, Bristol Myers Squibb. And then my colleague Betsy is dropping some information in the chat about chamber membership. If you're here today, you enjoyed the event, and you want to learn more about becoming a chamber member if you're not, or want to learn more about what your membership means if you are, check us out. Check out the website. It's newly redesigned, and we'd love to get some more information to you. So thank you all again so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.